vote to negotiate and execute an engagement letter with Bradley and Pearson LLP and Sheep and Stone LLP for legal services. I will entertain a motion.
Did anybody raise their hand first?
You win.
Please do. Yeah.
Second?
I would make a motion that we allow the director to negotiate and execute an agreement with Gravely and Pearson LLP and Sheep and Stone LLP for legal services on a contingent fee basis only, not to exceed 33 1/3%, and providing that no cost shall be payable for the reimbursement of any investigation or litigation experts, except in the event that we're recovered.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
The vote was unanimous. Thank you. And that takes us into our regular agenda. Item number 1, consider monthly financial statements for July 2019. Marissa?
The financial statements start on page 12. They go through page 19. All of this information was included in the packet for the sake of time. I can answer any questions. Our current year-to-date variances are fairly consistent with how we've been trending in previous months. We've also included an additional schedule after the financial statements on page 18 that Board Member Gilmore responds to a request that you had to reconcile our DCTA and NTMC budget with the original budget as approved by the board. So that's on page 18. It shows the budget with our consolidated May financials, one amendment that was approved by the board at the June meeting, and then reconciles between the two annual budgets for DCTA and NTMC to show that breakdown.
Thanks.
And then on page 19 is the capital projects budget report. This shows the project budget as well as life-to-date expenditures on those projects. If there are not any other questions on those, I believe we asked for acceptance. Yes. Page. Are there any questions on the financials for July?
No questions? Okay.
Otherwise, we would ask for approval of the monthly financials as presented.
Okay. Any motion?
So moved. Second.
Second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
The vote was unanimous. The motion carries. Thank you, Marissa. Agenda item number 2, presentation and discussion of monthly financial report. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I know that is.
They're slightly different.
Okay, for July 2019. And this is for information only. Marissa?
Starting on page 20 are 3 separate financial reports, the sales tax receipts monthly reports, as well as the monthly mobility as a service update and any necessary budget information to update the board. Our sales tax report and memo starts on page 20. Our receipts for the month were favorable 3% over budget. Year to date, we are trending slightly over budget to the tune of 0.78% over budget. Year over year, this is a 2.8% increase. On page 21, you can see the monthly breakdown, and then 22 and 23 show the sales tax collections for our member cities as well as the other transit agencies in Texas. Page 24 is the monthly mobility as a service update. As of this report, we had 5 contracts waiting to be executed, 4 of which were for software. I'm pleased to report that the 5th contract was executed this past week, so the next report in next month's packet will show that the only 4 contracts we have pending are ones with software companies that we've put on hold indefinitely, pending a need for that software. No contract or no task orders have been executed to date on any of these contracts. Page 25 is a discussion of budget information. This is where we will communicate any budget transfers that have taken place during the year. As of this month, we did have one adjustment that we've made to grant revenue in conjunction with the FY20 budget. Around mid-year, we start looking at our grant revenue, looking at the timing of the capital projects that we have, as well as the availability of operating grant revenue. And so in the FY20 budget, we have adjusted some of the timelines with the capital projects to move some of the cash outlay from FY19 into FY20. So in conjunction with that, we are recognizing reducing the FY19 grant revenue to record that grant revenue in the FY20 budget to be in line with the capital projects. And then we also have recorded a reduction in our federal operating grants based on the availability of funding from FTA. This is all just a timing issue. We're reducing the funding in FY19. We're expecting to receive it in FY20 instead of FY19. Are there any questions on any of those reports?
Okay, just kind of a general one.
Yes, sir.
At some point, since I'm new to this, I don't know where we are pension-wise, pension advisor-wise, how the contract's negotiated, all that kind of fun stuff. At some point, I just would like to understand that better. Last thing I want to find out is we've got this, looming deficit for some pension funding or whatever. I don't anticipate that, but just like to get arms around something.
Yes, so we have a ever increasingly growing note disclosure in the CAFR that talks about our PCDRS pension and any unfunded liability. I think as of last year, we were 90% plus funded. But I can find the exact portion of that.
Is that liability, it's part of the audit every year, right?
It is. And just as a point of clarification, we've separated out this agenda item 2 from regular meeting agenda item numbers 1 and 2, because the financial statements and capital project report are items that have to specifically be approved and accepted by the board every month, and then the other 3 that we're talking about now are just for informational purposes. So that's why we have those split up. Any other questions on those?
Okay, so this takes us to agenda item number 3, presentation and discussion of proposed FY2020 capital and operating budget. Again, informational item. Amanda, anything else?
Yes, ma'am. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. We have had 2 budget workshops in July and 1 on August 1st going over the FY20 proposed budget. So in your packet, today we're going to go over each aspect of the budget, operating, capital, revenues, as well as review the long-range financial plan. I do want to briefly introduce the different exhibits that were included in the packet. So Exhibit A, and we'll go into some of these in more detail throughout the presentation, but Exhibit A is the long-range financial plan, and that all of the exhibits begin on page 26 of the packet. Exhibit B1 is the change in net position. This is the same version that was presented at the budget workshop. We've added 2, and I believe they are green sheeted for today. We added Exhibit B1A and B1B. Basically, it takes the change in net position and it kind of chops it up a little bit. The bottom line is the same, and I will go into more detail, but I do want to point those out. Exhibit C is the capital improvement plan. Exhibit D is our budget contingency plan. We did not bring that forward at the budget workshop, but it is something that we adopt as part of our budget each year. And it just goes over what we would do if we had a decrease in sales tax 2% and above, and if we had exceptional increases as well, how we would handle that. And we also have a section in there that discusses grants as well. So it's pretty standard. If you have questions on it, we can go over it, but I wanted to include it because you will see that in September as part of the adopted budget. Okay, we'll start with an overview of the long-range financial plan. I believe everyone in here has seen this. Just briefly going over it, you'll find operating revenues are at the top. That's our passenger and contract service revenues And we have non-operating revenues where you'll find the sales tax and our operating grants as well as investment income. The operating expenses are the next section, and they are divided by bus, rail, and G&A.
This is page 26.
Oh, I apologize.
Packet.
Page 26, sorry. The next section goes over capital outlay and any major maintenance items we've identified. And again, we'll go over these in more detail. You've got capital grants and then our debt service. And the yellow section at the bottom, it shows our internal debt service coverage. And that's at 1.25. That is our recommended, that is included in our financial policies. So our net income, which is towards the middle top section, we always require that that is 1.25 over our debt service coverage.
Or better.
Or better. We always strive for better. And then we've got, sorry, this is you doing it. Okay. We have fund reserves, and these are identified in our financial policies, which we adopt every year. We bring them to the board typically in the October-November timeframe for review and adoption. The fund balance reserve is equal to 3 months operating. We have a sales tax stabilization fund as well. We have a fuel stabilization fund and a capital and infrastructure fund. And I would like to point out the capital infrastructure fund, any use of these funds has to be approved by the board, so staff will bring anything forward if we need these. A good example is when we had the FEMA projects with the flood in 2015. If we wouldn't have had the funds necessary to cover those projects, since they were a reimbursement basis, we could have brought that to the board and used these funds and then replenish this fund with the FEMA funds we received. And then the very bottom line is our net available fund balance. So that's just a brief overview of that. So a few assumptions that are built into the long-range model. The bus and rail revenues are assumed at a 1% increase annually. We have general inflation at 1.77. That is based off of the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. It's just the CPI average over a number of years.
Which CPI do we use?
In general,
Yeah, sorry, general.
and it's over a 9-year period from 2010 to 2019.
We assume a labor cost increase of 4% for bus, and that is an average based on our CBA, our collective bargaining agreement, that is in place right now. G&A and rail cost increase of 3%, and that's in line with each of our member cities. And we typically, every year, we assume a 10% increase in health benefits based on our average running rate. And then we will go over fuel in later slides as well.
Before you leave the long-range financial plan, I want to bring the board's attention that there's a little bit over halfway down on the proposed FY 2020 budget, there's a line item called infrastructure acquisition. And I'm going to be making a recommendation to the board that we take $3.5 million of that and move it down to the net available fund balance. Until such time that we have a good use for it and how we can actually spend the money.
Can I ask you a little quick question? We're pausing here under proposed FY 2026 under rail operating expenses. Why does it show that dipping? Is that just a typo or?
That would be, the majority of that is probably based off of our purchase transportation, our first transit contract.
Okay.
So I would assume, without having that level of detail in front of me,
It goes up
majority is
steadily,
probably
all of a sudden
assumed
it
to
drops,
that.
and it starts going back up. I just didn't know in 2026 what the story was on that.
I can dig into that and
Okay, I'm just
get back.
curious.
With built in assumptions in the contract. I don't know that this is it, but we built in assumptions as far as how many miles and hours of service we're running, how many vehicles we're running. So there's a contemplation, just like we're having in 2020, where they're dropping the cost per mile.
Okay.
My guess is that's what it is, but we'll double check and make
Okay.
sure that that's what.
And just to be clear, for those of you that attended both budget workshops, a lot of this is very much repeat from those previous meetings. Just as a reminder, this is our official public hearing. After this presentation, we'll open it up to the public for any public comment for you all to consider in conjunction with the budget, and then in September, we'll be bringing it back officially for approval.
I wasn't trying to start a fight.
Trying to start a what?
I'm not trying to be a troublemaker.
No worries.
Sure you are.
We'll move into looking at the change in net position, and again, that is exhibits B1, B1A, and B1B. Those should begin on, I believe, pages 27 through 29 of the packet. B1A and B1B are the green sheets that were at your place. So exhibit B1, again, as I said, is the exact same schedule as presented at the budget workshops. It includes just an overview of, it has bus, rail, and G&A all together in the operating expenses. And the only difference moving forward, in order to provide you guys a clear path, exhibit B1B takes that schedule and drops in depreciation, because depreciation was not on the previous schedule that we reviewed at the budget workshop. We needed to get some additional information on the capital projects we were moving forward with and things in order to finalize the depreciation numbers. So that is the only change between B1 and B1B, and then, or B1A, excuse me, I'm sorry. And then B1B takes the same budget and it splits it out by the DCTA budget and the NTMC portion. Because in September, when we adopt it, NTMC will actually be adopting that specific piece of the budget, and then the DCTA board will be adopting the DCTA specific piece. So I wanted everyone to be able to see how it looks, because it will look slightly, these will be on actual separate exhibits in September for adoption. So it just is taking the same numbers that you have seen and dissecting it a little bit different.
Like it. I like it, I like it.
So just a few points to go over agency-wide. Again, DCTA salary and benefits. We have a 10%, we assume a 10% increase in health benefits every year. And the bus salary and benefits, we base this on an average rate for each operator, and currently it's $18.34 an hour, and it's outlined by the CBA agreement. And we assume a 10% increase in health benefits for them as well. And Marissa, would you like to touch on anything regarding the CBA portion?
Sure. We've identified in the right column the increase in benefits that were provided with the new collective bargaining agreement. The increase in these benefits totals about $600,000. We added a fully employer-paid, employee-only coverage under the new CBA, as well as increasing the employer subsidy for all other coverage types. So we increased the dependent subsidy on those. For vision, we added employer-paid, employee-only coverage, and added a 50% subsidy for dependent coverage. And then life and disability was previously a $15,000 coverage level, and we doubled that, increasing that to a $30,000 coverage level for all full-time and seasonal employees. So we just spelled out these specific items since they were a large dollar amount impact in a year-over-year comparison.
Real quick, just refresh my memory. On the health benefits, is that saying that it's a 10% increase to DCTA staff and the transit operators in the amount that they're able to pay, that goes towards paying the premiums? Help me understand, what is that?
The 10% that we budget is the 10% employer portion. So
Okay.
the total premium less whatever the employee pays.
Okay, gotcha.
Yes. For both DCTA and bus.
Right.
On on the next slide, we've identified the staffing levels for each of the departments within G&A as well as the NTNC operations. That includes bus drivers as well as maintenance, customer service, some administrative staff, supervisors and dispatchers. The notes out on the right column identify every change that we've made from one department to another. The net impact of all of these changes shows a 1.5 FTE increase in DCTA employed staff and a 1.5 decrease in NTMC employed staff for a net 0 increase in FTEs as part of the NTMC reorganization, as well as some reorganization that we did internally with DCTA. We identified several positions that were either converted or deleted, and then there are 1.5 FTEs that are identified as new positions in the budget that will be presented on the very next slide. Are there any questions specifically about the staffing levels?
And I asked this last time, so that on the third-party contract operations, you're showing 1.5, but it says total third-party contract operations, whereas it says total DCTA FTE staff. I know that a few budgets ago, there was a different paradigm applied to third-party staffing with First Transit, I think, where it was based on out. So that doesn't represent 141 people, is that correct, or how's that?
Correct. We
Okay.
have 160, 170
Okay.
some employees under NTMC, some
Right.
of which are part-time or seasonal that don't work
Okay.
the full hours. So this is calculated based on the number of
Full-time
work
equivalent
hours.
or something like that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes. On the next slide, we've just gone over a couple of the new projects that are new programs that are identified in this year's budget.
Okay, so you have a little over $250,000 for bus operations. That includes the bus operations buyer, which was on the previous slide. This individual would assist our maintenance department in ordering supplies consistent with federal rules and regulations so we could draw down those federal funds. Large vehicle repowers, that's to help us extend the life of existing vehicles, and then adding $30,000 to bring our total passenger amenity budget to $100,000 for next fiscal year. And the next is rail operations, an additional $100,000 for PTC annual operating expenses. This is a new expense. We have entered revenue service with PTC, or positive train control, and now we will have to maintain that system. So that we're estimating that would be somewhere between $100,000 or less, but at this point we don't know because the system is so new.
We have two items under G&A. One is an HR assistant. This would be a part-time 0.5 FTEs. The costs shown here for both the HR assistant and the buyer are fully loaded wages and benefits. The part-time position would be an unbenefited position, but this portion does include employer taxes. This position would assist with FMLA reporting, leave reporting, ensuring that our Affordable Care Act compliance is in alignment. We have several competing high importance issues in the HR area, FMLA, leave, disability, workers' comp, as well as ACA, that all are very time sensitive, and so this would allow us to focus on each of those things and have a greater turnaround time on those items.
And the final item under the general and administrative is to prepare and relocate our IT components from that shared space that you saw a picture of during the budget workshop, where currently our IT infrastructure at the Deficit and Transit Center is paired and sharing space with the fire suppression room and the janitorial space.
And it may be on a, let's see. Okay, we talked about a security guard or a public safety official at the downtown train. Is it in,
Yes,
where is it in?
It's not on the slides, however, the guidance from the board was that we thought it was important to have, try to find it in the budget. We're within the budget, and that's what we're planning on doing. So unless there's concern or we want to open it up for further discussion, our intent would be to provide the service because we really need it, but we'll find savings to.
Okay, sure, okay,
Okay.
all right, yep, thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up.
Yep, you bet.
Moving on to operating revenues for the bus, you have a Schedule B2. This is just a snapshot of that same schedule that's in the packet. I believe it's on page 28. Passenger revenues are calculated using projected ridership and the average fare per rider. So we've listed those components for each of our services for you. Contract revenues are specific to each service and the contract terms agreed upon. Service hours, contract rates, and fuel expenses are all part of that calculation. Overall, we're projecting a 8.4% increase in the bus revenues for FY20. And we are transitioning, you can see this in the operating expenses as well. The FY20 budget anticipates more of a transition into more of the mobility as a service. So we've increased ridership for zone services, and it could decrease ridership related to the fixed route. So we've assumed that going into the FY20 budget. Rail revenues, we do assume an increase for FY20. In FY19, we assumed an average fare per rider of $1.16. And in FY20, we are assuming $1.50 per rider. And currently, we are year-to-date through May of 2019, the average fare per rider we're showing it $1.79 per rider. So it's still a conservative estimate moving into the FY20 budget year.
Non-operating revenue includes investment income. We've assumed a average yield of 1.5%, 2% for is what we're currently seeing, roughly 2.2% in FY19. The long-range plan assumes a 1.5% in the out years, and that's all based on what we end up showing in the long-range financial plan with the net available fund balance and investable funds. Miscellaneous income is included. This is largely attributable to the reimbursement from the City of Corinth for the rail station planning project that was approved by the board at the June meeting, and then federal and state grants as well. And as we've talked about, these the capital grants are all related to the project timelines that we have for those, and then calculated average operating drawdowns for items like preventive maintenance and operating assistance. The detail of which is shown on the next slide. This shows the detail of how the operating funds and capital funds are broken down by project and by expense type. Sales tax, we based on a 2% increase from the FY19 projection. Our average growth from 2013 to 2020 is at 5.3%. We talked about at previous budget workshops, some of our member cities going into FY20 have assumed a flat sales tax projection, a 0% increase. Others have budgeted up to a 4% increase. So this is kind of splitting that gap. We still believe this is very conservative as far as that goes. And then as we reviewed, we also have the sales tax stabilization fund that gives us a little bit more flexibility as well.
Okay. Bus operations, so as we talked previously, the main drivers for the bus operations cost are obviously the operators and fuel. Just showing you here a summary of the miles and the cost per service. We currently estimate $3 a gallon, and again, that's conservative. Next slide. This goes over all the main drivers, and again, the main driver of cost for bus operations is operator wages and fringe benefits at $9.1 million. Next is fuel at $1.2 million, and then parts, tires, and fluids at just under $1 million. Also included, we've separated out for you the purchase transportation, lift services. We provide lift service at UNT, Highland Village, and then the Alliance lift service. You see the dollar amounts there. Also under purchase transportation is the van pool program. I did want to mention, before Lindsay does Propel, we did receive a letter from the city of Denton on August 1st, just after the second budget workshop, and it is green sheeted in your packet. The city of Denton is requesting that DCTA provide shuttle service from Monsignor King Outreach Center to Our Daily Bread. Those are two social service agencies. Currently, Monsignor King closes at 8 a.m. and Our Daily Bread opens. Monsignor King closes at 8 a.m. and Our Daily Bread opens at 10 a.m. So we've worked out a potential shuttle service that would allow us, as long as Our Daily Bread agrees to open an hour earlier and Monsignor King open an hour later, we can run a shuttle using vehicles coming off of peak service Monday through Friday. They've asked us to add Saturday service. We don't have peak service on Saturday, so that means we're going to have to bring a driver in just to do that. So the total annual cost of that is $77,000. It's proposed that we would implement it in January, contingent upon Monsignor King and Our Daily Bread adjusting their hours, and that 9-month cost would be just under $60,000. So we wanted to bring that to the board for consideration as well.
And so just to be clear, since this is the first time we're talking about this specific project, this is something, the 57.5 would be added to the documents that are in front of you today to be then approved in September.
If I could, just as a piece of data, Our Daily Bread served its 1 millionth meal today.
Wow.
They've been in service for 19 years, so I think that's part of we want to make sure that there's a seamless transportation between Monsignor King and Our Daily Bread instead of people walking from there across the square, just and public safety as well, just for people walking across the streets and stuff. So yeah, it was a big celebration. So I just wanted to bring that to y'all's attention. That's quite a milestone actually.
I'd also like to add that there was very good collaboration between the city and DCTA and the social service entities that are described here. And I just wanted to publicly show my appreciation for everybody that tried to find a solution. I mean, this is, I think, going to really help folks with transportation needs. So we're very much in favor of adding this modification to the budget.
Can I ask just a quick question? I don't want to rain on this parade, but is there ridership associated with this? I'm trying to figure out what our direction is. If just a city says, I want this, we do it, or is there got to meet a threshold? I mean, it may be the greatest thing in the world, I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out, how do you go about assessing whether something is deserving an extra route or not?
Sure. You want to handle that? No, you don't.
I mean, isn't the answer we're working on that?
Pardon me?
Isn't the answer we're working on that? I seem to recall we had this discussion, we don't have a metric.
We don't, right.
Okay,
There you go.
okay.
I think, so it's a complicated issue, right? I mean, it's not always, you don't always do things just for ridership purposes. But in this case, we have a challenge between the city and folks not having transportation and where they're dropped off on existing routes. And so there's a gap between the transportation that we currently have, letting people out, and you have to walk through businesses, and it's not great. It's not a great situation. I don't know the total number of folks we have that are using it. I would say it's probably about 100 or so that would be.
Well, I mean, don't get me wrong,
occupied
this
vehicle.
may be the greatest use and the greatest resource for this at all, but I'm saying we have finite resources as an agency, and I know the road good intentions will pay you to bankruptcy just saying, I want to take care of this group. Plus you get one city saying, I want this, and this, and the other cities start going, wait a minute. So I just want to make sure we've got some forethought into our policy for doing this, at least moving forward. I mean, this may be great, I don't know, but if we don't, I just see a lot of piecemeal stuff out there, if that makes sense. And I'm not trying to bust you, because I know it's a meeting,
No,
but,
thank you.
Well, Can I just,
Yeah,
I think, and that's a good question. So do programs like this, whether it's Louisville, Highland Village, Corinth, Denton, these special type of shuttle programs, those are considered ridership, or they're not considered ridership in the scope of DCTA ridership? I mean, I would think that they would be part of the ridership
It will be
calculation.
considered ridership, it will be considered a regular fixed route. We will add to what we call trippers. And so if one vehicle coming off peak will run the first shuttle, and then another vehicle coming off peak, instead of going back to the yard, will run the second shuttle, and those will be advertised, because we have to open them to the public.
Sure, okay.
But we will count that ridership, when we do our annual reporting.
And I really appreciate you bringing up that point, because I think that was one of the reasons for the cost allocation study
Okay.
and the efficiency study, to see, okay, how are we doing from an efficiency model,
Yeah,
and
'cause
therefore if it
one
frees up.
pasture costs you $50 and the other one's costing you 10, you're like, wait a minute,
Right.
or however it works.
Yeah, yeah,
Sure.
so, yeah.
That's item number 10 on the agenda. Cost allocation efficiency.
Right, yeah.
And he's not.
There
Yeah.
is one other service we want to discuss with you, that is not currently included in the budget. We have discussed it with the board previously, and that is, contract service with the city of Coppell. We brought that to the board previously and got the head nods and direction that it's okay to go ahead and please explore that, partnership with them. So I do want to turn it over to Lindsay to give you a few more details, about what, again, is currently not included in the budget, but later in the agenda, we will either approve or not approve our contract with Coppell. So if you approve it, then we'll need to include that into the budget.
That's the presentation. So I'll pop up like a groundhog here. So we have, so the Propel lift service is being proposed for $100,000 total. $10,000 would be earmarked separately for marketing and communication outreach efforts, which would be led by the city of Propel. And then the actual invoiced services, for lift specifically, would be $67,500. Those are completely reimbursed costs from the city of Propel. And then a 25% administrative fee, on top of that, which would be about $20,500. So that's what's being proposed. So again, as Christina mentioned, regular agenda item number 11. So I'll go through all the details for that program, and if that, local agreement with the city is approved, then we will incorporate that into the purchase communication.
Thank you, Lindsay.
So is the net on that, it costs us $10,000?
No, it's, we're including the total just to ensure that that $10,000, that's the budget that was set by the city of Capel. So we're not touching that. It's just, we are wanting to identify that that is specifically allocated for marketing and communication so that it's attended to by the city.
So they're gonna pay all of it back, whatever costs we incur. That's what they budget. So it's absolutely revenue cost.
Can I ask our attorney one quick question? Because it looks like, I hate contracts that are perpetual. I know you've got an awning, but it basically says if you don't cancel, it keeps going. Is that something you go out of?
On the mobility services, yes, that's own costs that in there. We do have an out in those. It would have to keep them back. It does allow for an out.
I just want to know if these automatic limits, because I want to know what I'm voting on each time. So, I mean, I know this is a net, zero kind of thing, but
Yeah, and we can include that if we want to modify it, we'd rather do it for X number of years and then back before we get that on hold.
I'm going to do that one.
As a vendor, I love the evergreen.
Put it in the provider.
As a board member, yeah, they.
I mean, we're kind of a vendor there.
Yeah, I think we got it on the agenda.
We'll get there.
Okay, so moving on from bus to rail, again, main drivers of rail expenses relate to our service contract with First Transit. The majority of the expenses there are in the top 4 lines, train crew hours, car miles, management administration, and dispatch operations. If you add up all those costs, it's a little over $6 million, or 65% of that $9.7 million total. The next cost driver is facility maintenance, and that's of the rail operations and maintenance facility, and that's 28% of the cost. And you see all the other costs associated with rail operations. And again, next slide kind of goes over that, wages and fringe benefits. That's for the 4 DCTA staff. That's the AVP of Rail Operations, the Director of Railway Systems, Senior Manager of Rail Operations, and a Project Control Coordinator. Fuel services, we talked about the Denton County Sheriff Department. That's 40 hours a week of a Denton County Sheriff to ride the A train for fare enforcement. And then landscape contracts for our rail stations in the downtown Denton Transit Center. And then the next two are insurance, and the largest portion, again, of cost is the purchase transportation from First Transit under the rail contract at $9.97 million.
The sheriff, is the only responsibility for fare enforcement?
There are other, I mean, he also, it depends what the issue is and where it is.
Okay.
So he did assist and he will assist at the downtown Denton Transit Center. He is there. We had an issue earlier this week
Right.
where we had two passengers get into a physical altercation.
Altercation.
We were able to call him and he responded.
Okay, good. Thank you.
He also responds to issues that are somewhat on the rail line, that's happening. We've had, I don't know how, we've had vehicles, especially when we get down the right of way, almost into the way. He really enforces the laws all up and down the
Yeah.
rail line.
This slide just shows the key components of the general and administrative piece of the budget. Obviously, the major drivers on this budget are the wages and fringe benefits, as well as professional and legal services. We have the major items listed: printing, computer and software, dues and registrations, as well as the operating leases as well. The capital improvement plan, that is Exhibit C, and that is on page 29 of the packet. And this shows a breakdown of the current capital projects. This is part of the schedules that will be adopted by the board in September. And then in the following slides, each project manager will discuss in more detail the items.
Go back. So fleet, we currently, in the FY19 budget, have a little over 1.4 million for the purchase of 12 small buses. We currently are not able to purchase those. We buy them off of the Oklahoma State contract that has expired. They have a new RFP out, and we are waiting for that award to happen so we can pull the trigger on those 12 buses. So those funds will be rolled over into 2019, and then we have 2020, and then we have an additional million in 2020 for the purchase of 3 non-revenue vehicles, as well as 8 small low-floor vehicles. And as we discussed at the budget workshop, we will hold off on those and reevaluate based on the transition of service from fixed route to more mobility on demand base to see if we still need the 8 small low-floor vehicles.
Do they have a date certain on the Oklahoma contract?
Well, they didn't, and then they just extended it.
Seems
So
like apparently not.
the last date was the end of August, but it's moved multiple times, so I can't say that's the end date.
Thank you.
And we've looked at other options and state contracts, and there isn't anything that has the vehicle for something similar that we're looking at. So.
When you're talking about a small vehicle, what kind of passenger?
It's about 6 to 12.
It's a big Camaro.
It's not a Camaro. It's like a big Transit Connect, and they would be low floor, and I believe they have 2 wheelchair securement spots. So, next is professional services and technology improvement. So we talked about the 2 Stadler diagnostic laptops. That's $80,000. Again, the current laptops that we have that rail maintenance staff uses to diagnose electronic issues with the vehicles are no longer serviceable. I believe they're using like Windows XP. And then the next one, scheduling software. This is a grant that we had with the North Central Texas Council of Governments. Originally for scheduling software, we have redirected, or what's the word? Amended our agreement with COG to use those funds for a Train the Trainer program based on comments and feedback we received from our Health and Human Services roundtables. I'm going to skip Marissa, and I'm going to go to the shared use mobility study. These are funds that are left over initially from the comprehensive operational analysis, and then those funds, what was left after that was used for the shared use mobility study. We still have just under $60,000 in federal planning funds, and we would like to use those funds to conduct, for consultant assistance with the service changes as we integrate mobility as a service. And one of the items later in the agenda relates to awarding a task order to HDR, which these funds would help cover some of those costs. Back to you, Liz.
To jump up one to the integrated fair payment of $600,000, this is to allow us to look at either a reloadable card option, something similar. DART is in the process of rolling out or has rolled out a GoPass tap card. It allows customers to load cash onto a card at any of several retail locations or at the customer service window, etc. It would also allow us better ridership tracking. This is one of the potential items that we could look to postpone into 2021 or free up the cash associated with this project if we wanted to wait and see after our service analysis and after we really execute some of the mobility as a service contracts, kind of what our fleet makeup really looks like. The funds associated with this would be to put a validator on every vehicle in our fleet as well as at platforms. So obviously if we require less fleet, we wouldn't need to outfit as much fleet. So this is something that we have no intention of pulling the trigger on October 1. So if it's something we want to wait and revisit later in the fiscal year and appropriate the funds at that point, we could certainly do that.
I'd suggest that we leave these funds there earmarked, recognizing that we can move them. And it might be that we want to redirect those funds. It's kind of what we were talking about with the infrastructure funds, but I'm going to be talking about the path forward item on item number 10. We may want to look at using some of these funds for that. So let's just, for now, leave it where it is. We'll recommend.
And last on the slide is the server and network infrastructure, $43,000. This is standard planned replacement cycle of servers and storage, provides fail-safe remedies, and it is a rollover project from 2019 into 2020. Trail safety improvements, the $124,000. We are currently, let me back up. We've performed a rail crossing study and have a list of recommendations for trail safety enhancements. So these funds would be used to install some type of enhancements regarding safety along the trail. Examples of things we've done in the past: sea crossings, enhanced signage and striping. But there's still a full list of recommendations that we use these funds for.
Is the remarking that we're going through now because of the assessment impacting those numbers?
This is, no.
The remarking had to do with a FRA
Right.
site inspection, where the markings for the what do you call it? Oh my gosh, quiet zones.
Quiet zones.
For the quiet zones, the approach from the road to the rail crossing requires a visibility striping, and so the FRA came in, did an assessment, we definitely recognized that there were several crossings that needed to be restriped. So that's on the road, not on the trail. In this case, this is trail signage to say on the approach, as an example, you could put information with regard to your approaching crossing, on the strips, crossings.
But I've got you now.
You got me now.
Sorry, took me a minute to get there.
Because Railroad Street's getting redone today. I don't know if it's you or the city.
So I don't think that one is us, but we are working with the city of Denton on doing some median cuts at a couple of the trail crossings, and we are using these dollars for those. So whatever remaining funds are existing, until at like 20.
As long as we're capturing that, but it's unplanned. Cool.
Okay, the next one is rail safety improvements, and again, that's 200,000, that's an annual amount, like Christina mentioned. It's like, start ticking off some of the items included in that study. It's also there, some examples of things we've done in the past. We use some of these funds to close the Eagle Point crossing. Going forward, we could use these funds to address issues or concerns that we might have at other crossings, including Colorado and Brinker.
That was the best webcam in Denton County, that Eagle Point crossing.
The last item on the slide is the Louisville Bike Trail. We have 2 miles left in the trail that needs to be completed. It's currently under construction. It's about halfway finished. I went for a nice little tour last week. It looks great. We anticipate it being finished the first quarter of FY20. So the remainder of these funds will roll over into FY20 to allow us to complete the construction.
No, it's not gonna be mountain bikes. We're not having it. Let me be clear.
So I'm going to take 3 of the 4 items under the major maintenance items: the road crossing refurbishments, the rail operations and maintenance facilities scheduled maintenance, and then the Stadler vehicle OEM or original equipment manufacturer replacement. Those are all part of a regular and ongoing maintenance program and plan that is required in order for DCTA to maintain a state of good repair, which is a federal requirement of our facilities and our assets.
For the canopy repairs, we've talked about that one. This amount will be used for 2 different stations, and recognizing we have more stations to do, we'll do it using a phased approach. But the 434 will cover 2 stations to fix the fascia and the soffit from the water damage.
And we talked about earlier the bridge at the bus operations and maintenance facility. The engineer estimates to resolve that issue is $125,000. Again, it's currently structurally stable. It's not the bridge itself, it's the approach that is sinking. So we would like to address that, because right now we're just continuing to Band-Aid the issue instead of fixing the issue.
It's the potholes on surface, right?
I'm sorry?
Repairing the potholes on surface.
Next is positive train control. So like I mentioned earlier, we are currently in revenue service demonstration for PTC. So we are closing out that grant. We have those funds, we have a little over $1 million left, and we would be rolling those over into fiscal year 2020. And then new funds for PTC enhancements. These are funds, we have a total $5 million federal grant from the Federal Railroad Administration called the CRISI grant, and don't ask me, I forgot what it stands for at the moment.
Consolidated Rail
Infrastructure Safety something.
Improvement.
Thank you.
There you go.
But we're only recommending putting $1.78 million in FY 2020, and again, right now we're conducting a study with LAN to determine, looking at track geometry, to determine if there's anything we can do with the existing track to help reduce the impact or the delays associated with implementing PTC.
And the infrastructure acquisition, 3.7, this is the item we discussed earlier, that we recommend reducing that number by 3.5 and moving that down in the financial plan in the unreserved. Unrestricted reserve.
Net available.
Yeah.
Somebody tell me. And then the brownfield remediation, this is the project that's currently underway at the rail operations and maintenance facility. We do expect to close this project out, but it'll be next fiscal year. The phase we're in right now is working with the city of Louisville to obtain the municipal site designation and actually closing the unplanned landfill with the TCEQ in order to make that property developable for future initiatives.
It's not a landfill, that's a dump.
Yeah.
That's a technical term.
Okay, the documented dump.
And then we've also broken out the principal and interest payments associated with our 2 outstanding debt issuances from 2009 and 2011. The total is about $1.9 million in principal and roughly $1 million annually in interest, and that is included in the long-range financial plan.
So our steps forward are, we have a public hearing today at this meeting, and then in September, we would incorporate any feedback we receive from the public hearing or the board today into our budget, and we would bring it for actual adoption at our September board meeting.
I've got a couple of things to talk about. We are talking about the efficiency study, and I know item 10, we've already mentioned that, so would we consider putting a placeholder in this year's budget for the cost of the efficiency study?
We can do that. I don't know exactly how much. I'm thinking that $600,000 for the fare payment or integrated fare could be repurposed for some of that, since we don't know how much the integrated fare payment system is going to cost either.
Okay. And then the other one is, should we be talking about a placeholder for that impact fee?
I think we should discuss it, but I don't know that we need to make a decision at this point as to how much to put there. I'd rather have a more in-depth discussion about it, and then based on that, we can determine how much to take out of, to either use one of the reserves that we have, or to take net available cash and create a reserve.
Kind of an unnecessary signal.
Yes. That's why I didn't put a number.
Any other questions, comments?
I just want to make sure I have something.
Yes, sir.
Other than grant funds, are there any other revenue sources that are tracked or is there restricted?
Well, our sales tax by statute is technically restricted to only be used for transportation and mobility uses. But otherwise, no, our grant revenue is specific to projects as we identify them in the formula funding, or with the associated capital project, but passenger revenues, investment income.
So we can use bus revenues anywhere we want, we can use rail revenues anywhere we want, we can use sales tax anywhere we want. None of that's tracked.
I suppose with some caveats, yes.
Sales tax is supposed to be leveraged for transit purposes.
And so when you say transit, does that mean rail?
It could be rail, it could be bus,
Loss.
loss. It's when you start
Okay.
thinking about,
Pretty much
it's difficult, but if you start talking about using funds for things not related to transit,
What non-transit expenditures are in this budget?
An example could be a sidewalk. If you're using the funds to build a sidewalk connecting maybe from the Downtown Kenton Transit Center to a bus stop, that can be used, those funds can be used for that. If you're talking about a sidewalk that is within, let's say, Highland Village, and it doesn't connect transit, it's just in the neighborhood, you cannot use the amenities of that.
Can't just do a general hike and bike.
And then the other restriction would be once we obligate it under a contract, the expectation is to execute against that contract, and you would obligate the funds as part of a contract. Typically, we have a statement in every contract that we sign that says we have the ability to, in case of funds not being appropriated by, or the
Annual
appropriation clause, that we can back out of that agreement without penalty. And we would have to pay whatever services have been rendered, you typical close out of a contract, but that's another form of obligation where funds, I don't know that we track on every one of our contracts that we provide the board what obligations we have at any particular time. It's just the course of doing business.
Okay. And I think that's, I was confusing that. And then is the integrated fare system, is that kind of what you told me was?
Yes.
I'm not sure I'm going to go with this. Kind of a deal with the devil. In other words, you tie yourself
I
into
wouldn't
software
quite-
upgrades and
I
other
wouldn't
other
call
issues.
quite.
Okay. Those were
call
not
it
your
that,
words.
but
Those were
yes.
my.
That's not what I would think.
Yeah, that was.
We have an opportunity to become part of a larger integrated fare payment system. There are provisions that would allow us to exercise an option to allow us to put in the same fare payment system that the two other transit authorities are implementing. cost, the specific cost to that is gonna be contingent upon what we do with the mix of our, how much private, how much direct service we're providing. And I don't think that we have a clear path for that right now.
Well, your words were not yours.
But we've got you now.
Yeah. That's all.
On the Chrissy grant, I know there's an outstanding question on whether other things have to occur. Do we have a timeline when that's gonna be? If we think if that's not to be discussed here, then we can discuss it some other time. I just wanna bring that up again, because I'm just fully aware that there may be some conditions on that, or may not be, we just haven't come to some resolution on
I
that.
do believe, I do believe we are checking with the FDA to confirm that they have a clear understanding, or sorry, the FRA, to confirm that they have a clear understanding of what our project is and how our system operates, because we're starting to think they may misunderstand and be requesting something that's not necessary.
There's language they're requesting that we put in in our access agreement with STAR. Okay. That's essentially what we're waiting on.
Right, okay. Some clarification on that from the
Federal Railroad Administration.
And then depending on that, we may have to go back and have some conversation with DART, or we may
Correct.
not. Okay.
But there is a glimmer of light.
Okay, great.
Very, yeah.
But it's a spark. Any other questions? Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so that brings us to agenda item number 4, public hearing on proposed FY 2020 capital and operating budget. So the public hearing on DCTA's proposed FY 2020 operating capital budget to allow board to receive public input on the proposed budget is now open at 4:17. So we would ask that if there are any speakers, keep it if we can to 3 minutes. And Brandy, do we have any other requests? I have one. Did you say no?
No.
Okay. At this time, and when you come forward, if you could give us your name, address, and so we have Jim Owen. Wherever he wants.
I'll just hold the corner.
Wherever
I
he
gotta leave
wants.
the stuff in front of me.
Okay.
My name is Jim Owen. I'm a bus operator at the DCTA. And I've been assigned for the last 7 years to come to the board meetings. My president, Kenneth Day over there, thought that was a good idea. And I've been here longer than most of the board members. And for the new ones, they're all new. I follow the money, I read the packets. I'm also on the City of Denton Traffic Safety Commission for the last 4 years. And I've been on the negotiating team, union negotiating team for the last 2 contracts. So, I was also on the 2030 Planning Committee in the City of Denton. But what I have to talk about today is, I'm gonna take my union hat off and put on the financial thing. One of the things that's coming up is, you're talking about small buses. Talking about spending over $1 million for small buses to get rid of 3 fixed routes, 1, 2, and 3. Those fixed routes in the City of Denton. Route 1 is 29 stops, 4 shelters, and 5 connections. Route 2 is 47 stops, 7 shelters, and 13 shared connections. And Route 3 is 39 stops and 1 shelter. that I've been told is to right-size the fleet because of the ridership. But 71% of the buses in America are over 35 feet long. And that's a statistic from APTA. Okay? We have on our lot, at the Denton lot, we have 12 buses, 12 Gilligs, the green ones, that had new engines put in them and transmissions. Back when we were still at the at Mayhill at the dump. They were brought over and used for a while and then parked. They've been parked for 2 years. But they run fine. So why are you spending $1 million on a small bus? The other thing is, there's no Title VI involvement here because if you go to on-demand service, you don't have to justify it with poor people, with disability people, any of them. So if you're talking about pulling up all the poles on all these stops and all these shelters, which by the way cost about $8,000 to put in each one of them, then you need to think about this. And I'm not trying to be picky, I'm just saying you need to start a conversation here about this. Because one of the things that you wanted to do is you wanted to spend $150,000 to hire a civil engineering firm to plan this. And what I would suggest, here's the guy, Christoph Spieler from Houston. He and another guy, Jerry Walker in Portland, are the only two that have ever increased ridership on fixed routes here lately. He's in Houston. Pay him, because the people that DCTA has paid to increase ridership have not been successful at all, especially on the rail. But somebody like this, you could bring them in and talk about it. And I thought when you were talking about mobility as a service, you were going to add on to the fixed routes. We have in the city of Denton, in Louisville, Highland Village, you've got planners, you've got development people, you've got traffic engineers, but you have no say in where the stops are. UNT tells us where the stops go and how many routes there are. And they're paying $3 to $4 million. Chris is paying $12 million. And, you know, he just takes your word for it that this is where it ought to be. With the growth in the cities, especially at Denton, it seems to me you've already got synergy in the pricing, in the tickets and all, how much they cost and who's taking them and all that. You need some synergy between the three cities of the stops, economic development, this sort of thing. And I just think you are new. You need to you're asking great questions, but you need to take a look at spending money to downsize what I consider dumbing down the service in a large metropolitan area. You need to take a look at that. And like I say, instead of paying somebody with no success, pay this guy. He increased Houston 20% on fixed route. And Houston right now is going to the voters for $5.5 billion for transit. So that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Are there any other speakers who'd like to come up that have not signed in?
No.
Okay. So hearing none, I am closing the public hearing at 4:24. That takes us to agenda item number 5, presentation and discuss a bylaw modification plan. Lindsay?
So this item is on the agenda today to seek direction from you all today on the timeline itself. and the bylaws modification process as we go through this over the next couple of months. Before we go through the detailed proposed timeline, however, I kind of just want to walk through the exhibits that are in your agenda packet. There are quite a few.
They're also at their
Yes,
desk,
you
and they
also-
were emailed on Friday.
Yes, so you have it in your email from Friday. You have copies at your places, and then it's also included in the backup as 3 different exhibits for the actual draft of the bylaws. As you recall, the board had directed staff to engage Frank Stevenson to draft the proposed bylaws. He's with the firm Locklord. And it's also important to note that Mr. Stevenson took our current bylaws, not any previous revised iteration of the bylaws, but our actual current existing bylaws, and used that to amend per SB 1066. He also made additional cleanup modifications to the document, noting that this is probably the best time to just go ahead and do a full overhaul of the document while we have the opportunity and it's already open for discussion. So in your packet, you'll see Exhibit 5 is the bylaws document that reflects all of the proposed changes, and those are pages 58 through 69 in your packet. And again, you also have that at your place. It's fully tracked. It will show you every single minute change that he made, and that also includes the cleanup language for that. Exhibit 4, which is on page 47 in the backup, is the draft with only the more substantive changes. So those are going to be primarily the revisions made as a result of SB 1066. And then Exhibit 3 is the clean version, and that's on pages 37 through 46. That version incorporates all of the proposed changes that Frank had made to the document without any of the track notes. So it's clean, very easy to read. And then to tie all of these together and to provide a more concise overview of outstanding items, Mr. Stevenson also provided a document that identifies the major issues that the board may want to consider in the bylaws. And this is laid out in Exhibit 2. That's on page 36. This document would also be part of the conversation that we anticipate having at the September board meeting, which we will go through here in a moment with the timeline. So that's all I have on the bylaws exhibits walkthrough. So before we get into the process, the timeline itself, are there any questions regarding the 4 exhibits? So on the screen here, you'll see just kind of a condensed timeline representing kind of the major milestones that we're looking at in the timeline. And then I just wanted to kind of put some quick hits up here for you. Didn't want to bog down with a crazy timeline up there on the screen. So in your backup is Exhibit 1, pages 34 and 35, is the full timeline schedule. It's 2 pages. We just want to be sure that you are comfortable with this proposed schedule. Seek your feedback on any changes you'd like to see. And so you'll see the first entry here in the timeline is for July 10th. As mentioned earlier, this was when staff was directed to work with Frank Stevenson on these bylaws. Next, he provided the draft bylaws to staff on August 14th to ensure that we had enough time to get it in your packet, get it to you all on that Friday for sufficient review, so y'all could start doing your thing. And then today has been set aside for the timeline and review process discussion. The next item on there, the bylaws review and feedback period, we are proposing just over a 2-week window from today to September 6th to review the bylaws individually and to seek feedback from your appointing entities. Similar to what we've done, kind of maybe 2-3 months ago, lost all track of time now. But this is kind of a clean slate, kind of a restart. for that. So as you review the document, we ask that you use the clean version to provide feedback and comments. And so we can certainly send you a Word version of that document to make it a little bit easier to go in and actually do tracked comments. And then send that document to Brandy. We will then take all of that and compile it into one master document. And then we will include that master document in the agenda packet to be distributed on September 20th. September 26th is a scheduled board meeting. We expect to have a full review and discussion of all of the combined feedback during that meeting. And from there, we will take all of the discussion points, all of the agreed upon language, incorporate that into the next draft iteration of that document, and update it and distribute it to you for the October 8th, in the October 18th board packet. And then we've set aside October 24th's board meeting for another full discussion with an item on the agenda for the board to approve the final draft.
And
So
Frank is available for those meetings.
he absolutely is, yes. Today, the specific purpose was to review the timeline itself and to make sure we have the process that you're amenable to, and so that's why he's not here today, but he is absolutely available to bring in for the more substantive piece of that conversation. So again, as I mentioned earlier, want to get your feedback and direction on this. Happy to answer any questions or provide clarification and take direction on that.
So I'm very comfortable with Frank and Joe's team, so we can hash that out, because I think Chris sends in his, I send in mine, Sam sends in his. You're going to miss nuance. You know, you're going to have the red copy and the green copy and the blue copy. So I would feel better, and maybe it's just the way my brain works, if we could maybe accelerate this time frame a little bit and come in with our changes, but I don't know if I need that much time before I have a workshop with Frank to do that. I'd rather this might be wishing more than I think to do, but I'd love to have the bylaws done by the fiscal year starting. I don't know if that's get to that.
Well, we only have one more meeting.
I think it really comes down to how that meeting shakes out, right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
We'd have to make the agenda lighter so we could spend more time
Right.
workshopping this.
this to me is a good worst case scenario. My best case is we're done by October 1, but I get that we could be in here hashing and need another iteration. I get that.
What's that?
Yeah, because that's extra. You get paid extra for that, right?
Oh, yeah.
200% of what you get paid.
Yeah, exactly.
That's just my, my perfect world. I understand that I may not get my perfect world, but that's what I would like to see personally if we can get through that.
We could list it for consider. Joe was actually suggested maybe what we could do is list it for individual consideration for the 26th. If we're there, if we're not, then it goes to the next month, and then we can look at potentially holding a special session if the board wants to go through bylaws. Yes. Yes.
Sam?
I like this. I'm sorry. I've never met Frank, for instance. Like, some of these things that are on the critical items list, it's got acronyms I don't know. It's talking about things we discussed, being in the bylaws, like the cost analysis. I'd like to hear what context was that discussed. If that's, if those things are going to be placed in there, I'd like to have a little more. I'd like to have an opportunity to discuss it, consider it before I vote on it with the full context. That I think y'all have, which I kind of understand. If you have the context, maybe that sounds like a lot more time.
Sure. Yes, Claire.
Well, I think going to that point is that if we were to have a workshop before sending it on this list that Frank has provided, which are things that are substantive decisions, I feel like the board needs to kind of discuss that before Frank and everyone starts making their comments. Like it seems, going back to your point, there's things that we all need to get on the table and discuss policy-wise. That seems like maybe that next meeting needs to be Frank and Joe facilitating a discussion on those policy decisions. The board makes a decision on how we're going, what direction, and then we follow up with any other nuanced changes we want to make after that. At least that would give the lawyers direction on where they need to go forward.
Because you're gonna have that conversation regardless.
Yeah, you either get a mess of
Right.
Yeah,
everyone
that's
giving
a-
their
that's a
comments
fair
or
point.
everyone
Right.
on the same page.
Right.
The only benefit to the way I think it's structured is if y'all like it, in other words, there may be issues on here that are fine. In other words, you don't wanna make any
Or
change.
non-issues, yeah.
Yeah, they're kinda non-issues.
Right.
That he may have identified as an issue, but it's really not an issue. Then we don't have to discuss it. But I mean,
Yeah.
if we need more,
Right.
I'm fine with more, cause I'm thinking the bylaws are gonna be in place for years,
Yeah.
right? The less is what makes me nervous.
Yeah. I agree.
Well, I think if we can incorporate, I think it'll help, you know, we do have kind of an asymmetrical data set here on the board, and anything we can do to help kind of level
Absolutely.
that history, I think is helpful.
Yeah.
So I can walk with that.
And that's kind of why we went with a pretty conservative.
But if we
Schedule.
can maybe front load some of that
Yeah.
conversation, maybe that would help.
It's a good idea, so thank you.
Okay, so what I think we're hearing is that you want to hold a special call board meeting prior to the September 20th for capital distribution.
No, I think it's sticking to the schedule, but
That's
making
not
sure
what-
at September 26th, we have Joe
Right.
and Frank facilitate a discussion of the substantive items.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
No special call meeting.
Finding a date
No.
for all of you
Yeah.
is really.
I am not advocating more meetings. I'll make that clear.
Mayor?
So, Sam, to your point, I mean, because you're right, there's board members that are not privy to 6 to 8 months worth of conversation that occurred. So we can, and that's what I've tried to get to, or at least begin the conversation back at the retreat, the board retreat. So really would like to find a way to where that satisfies that sort of gap for you and maybe for you as well, or anybody that's interested in that.
I didn't even know Frank exists. It was a piece of paper that Frank.
So how do we do that? Because I think of taking the time to, it could be a 2-hour discussion to sort of, not relive, but to summarize the previous discussion. We can do that in a board meeting or, so I'm open, but I think it's critical that you all have some of that very detailed information, because it's a huge gap. I mean, I can understand probably you guys know what's going on, we're sort of here, y'all been talking behind the curtain.
I'm like gonna make up a new person so y'all feel like you don't know.
Well,
Well, Sally said, and Frank heard her say it, so.
Well, and maybe we could start the meeting earlier. I do want to be sensitive because like Sam was telling me, I've got to call and let them know I'm going to be, y'all have a council meeting today.
Yes.
So I want to be sensitive to, we're going to be talking about scheduling these meetings, but maybe if we could move it up a couple of hours, Mayor, and just,
Yeah, I mean, I'm on Thursday.
yes,
Yeah,
Start earlier.
On September 26th.
Just
instead of
that-
starting
just
board
that
meeting
one.
at 1:30,
unless we need,
have a workshop prior to that.
would that work for,
Yeah, I mean, if we start at noon, I mean, that should give us enough time, right?
yeah. Yeah.
I think for the history and context,
Huh?
I think an hour and a half for going through the history and context
Okay.
of SB 1066
Yeah.
and kind of what got us here for the bylaws revisions.
For sure.
I think that would be sufficient.
Okay.
If it's more than that, you're gonna have people checking out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Me too, maybe.
You got 90 minutes for most folks,
Yeah.
that's.
Some
the way
have
it is.
less attention span than others,
To
so.
speed up our cadence as we're talking. What do you mean?
All right.
Okay, yeah, good discussion. So if we can do that September meeting at noon,
Okay.
and then have Frank come for that, make sure he's here for that first
Yep.
part, and, yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you for getting that together for us. That takes us to agenda item number 6, consider resolution R19-10, adopting DCTA's board governance rules of procedure. Again, you should have some handouts at your place. Christina?
Okay. The agenda is page number 7, or sorry, the memo is page number 70 for this item. And if you recall, Chris just alluded to, Mayor just alluded to the October 14th workshop that we went through with SGR for the board governance. We have taken the feedback that was received at that meeting and incorporated that into the draft, which was sent out in the board packet. I will tell you I'd like to discuss 2 more edits after legal review on page 7, and they're actually very small.
Minor.
Page 77, under the Code of Ethics.
No gift cards.
Item B, where it says occasional items with a value less than $50 may be exempt from the provision. We need to put in there excluding cash and gift cards. So that will be added. Maybe turn to page 80.
No gift cards, guys.
Under page 80, under citizens, as far as meeting decorum. So
Okay.
it's items
The top.
C, Romanet 3I.
Mm-hmm.
Midway through, the sentence starts with any person, making personal, impertinent, profane, or slanderous remarks, and it goes on. He is recommending we remove making personal and impertinent, that language out. Can you explain why?
Yeah, the reason why, one of the bills that was passed, this past legislative session, basically said that someone can come in here and they can direct their comment at a person individually, so long as they're not slanderous or, using profane language, they can do that. Where before we said always direct the comments to the board, now they can be directed at a particular person.
So everybody be on guard.
Impertinent,
Right.
Yeah, it's pretty subjective.
Yeah.
Other than those 2 edits, staff or legal did not have any additional edits to add. I ask if you have any additional edits.
So, I'd kind of like to put this one on hold, simply because if there's anything that conflicts with the bylaws in this, then we're gonna have to come back and change it. So,
We did discuss that with legal earlier today, because the conflict of interest portion is in both. So we can table
I
it.
would just take no action to it.
Just take-
Take
yeah,
no action on it right now.
I don't disagree we need this, I just think it's cart before the horse right now.
Okay. So one thing, if we can move forward on, if everybody really is okay with the 1 meeting a month, I would love to clean up our calendars. So if that's an item that's not going to be changed in the board governance document, and it's going to be consistent with the conversation that occurred at the board governance workshop, then I would, upon board direction, we would like to direct Randy to cancel all those different committee meetings that are on the calendar, and even cancel the monthly meetings and start those over, because it's a little messy right now. We have outgoing board members who have already left, but they're still on, and we need to add new. Is there any issue with taking care of the calendar as far as the meetings go?
Or any issue with just reducing it down to 1 meeting? I mean, so the packets go out. If you have any questions, I mean, you always have the opportunity to pick up the phone, call Raymond, Christina, and have those discussions. But this is the time when, this was kind of like, today was kind of like what it would look like if we go to that 1 meeting a month. Except maybe not this long.
The agenda seems to be flowing well.
Heavy,
Okay.
heavy conversation.
Well, Brandy had a very good idea, that she will not send all cancellations and new meetings all at once. She will send cancellations probably on Monday, okay? And then on Tuesday or Wednesday, I'll give you a couple of days, she'll send you the new ones. So she'll wait a day before she sends the new ones. Nothing's worse than getting flooded with all these things in your inbox. It gets confusing. So please watch for those on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
So, because of all that, how do we want to deal with agenda setting for that? Do we have maybe a deadline when you want us to communicate items that we'd like to see on the agenda? How do we want to do that?
2 weeks? Or
Did we talk? I thought we had talked.
We talked about a couple week
Right.
time, I think. That's my recollection.
Right.
Like a week
And I may
ahead
miss
so
that
that
'cause I
they
just
can.
stepped.
Yeah, I think we did talk about 2 weeks.
And we also have included on today's board meeting agenda at the end, an opportunity to provide a request for adding to the agenda.
So if I might request a, part of the process, that we just put a reminder out there for the board that, hey, you've got till this deadline to get things on the September agenda or on the October agenda.
And we suggested that the board members provide that to Brandy, she's your board support, so that she can serve as our clearinghouse, and then that can come to us and we'll make sure that it's getting on the agenda.
You like, you want, yeah. Yeah. And maybe just a calendar that provides the deadline at a certain point.
We can send that out to, we'll go ahead and get we'll do cancellations, do board meetings, and then
Reminder
the deadline
notices.
for the reminder of agendas.
Could you just erase my account and start over?
Oh.
I'm gonna delete all the meetings we have. He's wanting you to do it without him having to accept it. We feel your pain.
I understand.
Yeah.
I understand.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Okay, thank you, Christina. And that takes us to agenda item number 7, electing DCTA board officers and approving resolution R19-11. Just to kind of remind the board of something we had talked about. So historically, we had chair, vice chair, treasurer, and secretary. We talked about, because the secretary position really doesn't necessarily do anything. Historically, everyone else takes care of the notes and things, and obviously, so we thought of maybe combining treasurer, secretary, if we feel like we need to leave that in there, or at least for now until the bylaws are gone through, because we still have chair, vice chair, treasurer, secretary.
So the state law requires chair, vice, and secretary.
Correct.
Okay. So,
And Frank had identified merging the secretary and treasurer on item number 10 of his recommendations for discussion topics.
So we could do treasurer/secretary.
yeah, I think.
And that'd be one position. Does that make
What's
sense?
the treasurer do?
Currently, we don't have one.
Well, but they would sign checks and
I
all.
mean, I can imagine it might be statutorily required or something. I'm kind of, it's almost a legal question. Because
Yeah.
if there isn't, it implies to me someone's doing something they're not doing.
I think it was
No,
check
I
signing
just-
was it, wasn't
The treasurer historically has been the primary check signer, although we utilize historically the chair, vice chair, and treasurer, whoever is available to come to the office and sign payments. We
They're
just
all
all agree
listed
for that
as-
function,
they're
and
all
they're
listed
all
as-
approved signers
Has
for
the
the bank.
treasurer also historically been the chair of the finance committee?
Correct.
Which we don't have a finance committee
it?
anymore.
And one of the lists on 10 was you wanted to eliminate or retain the treasurer. So we were discussing now about eliminating it.
Well, I think we have a board of 5 now, and if we had 4 executives, 3 makes it. Because,
It's just insulting to one person.
well, I'm good with going with what the state tells
The
me.
rest of us are officers. You're just
You're not.
You're the guy.
Last picked.
TJ, you're good with what?
I'm good with going with what the state mandates,
Yeah.
which is the chair, vice, and secretary.
Okay, so those will be the 3 positions we'll be addressing today. So I will entertain nominations for the chair.
I nominate Ms. Diane Costa.
Second.
Any other nominations?
Does anyone want to do it?
Okay, is it a vote? Is it a vote? we think? Yeah.
Why we did it quick.
Okay.
Why don't we do this, let's get all the nominations and then we'll take one,
That-
approving a resolution
Okay.
and name the.
Sounds
Name
good.
the
Yeah.
Nominations for vice chair.
I'll nominate TJ Gilmore.
Second.
And nominations for treasurer slash secretary, and I would like to nominate Randall, since you have some experience in transportation.
Second.
Okay, so that's the list, it sounds like you got that.
So I'll make a motion approving resolution R19-10. And let's name all the people.
So for chair, Diane Costa, for vice chair, TJ Gilmore, for treasurer, secretary, Ms. Randall.
You know what, we don't have a resolution for that, it's just, yeah, go ahead and make a motion.
Okay.
We do have a resolution. It's R 1911.
Oh,
Page 84.
Wrong one.
Yeah, page
Gilmore,
84.
yeah, I said that.
On governance. Yeah, I don't have a nice binder.
I was gonna say, we'll have to find it for you next time.
No whining.
There we go, you're right, exactly. Thanks, Mark.
All right, so are we good?
Yep, we're good, just go ahead and.
Okay, so all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The vote was unanimous, the motion carries.
And for R 1911, since I said 10.
Yes,
All right.
thank you for correcting me.
Wait, who motioned to pass the resolution?
Did somebody say something?
Who motioned?
I don't think anybody did.
I think Diane did, but
I
can
Oh, did you?
said
Okay,
yes.
I thought,
And
I
then-
thought you read it.
Second.
Okay.
And then
I don't know if anybody seconded.
Yeah.
I think one of us did.
you
wanna do it again?
seconded.
Don't say it.
Do it again.
Oh my gosh, I can't keep track of you guys.
I'll move we adopt the slate as presented. Does anybody want a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, the vote was unanimous, the motion
Let's
carries.
do it one more time.
Oh. Third time's
There's
a
gotta be
charm.
somebody who hasn't moved and seconded yet, come on.
Okay, so that brings us to agenda item number 8, consider appointing a regional transportation council representative and alternate. I would like to ask the board humbly to consider me continuing to serve as the RTC representative for DCTA.
I would fully support that. I'd like to respectfully request that Mary Watts be our alternate.
Okay. It doesn't look like you, sir.
Do you get a vote?
Are you available? Should we check the calendar?
They are on.
It is where we're in Arlington.
It's alternate.
Oh, yeah, it's alternate.
There
we go.
So Diane would be the representative,
the-
Chris would be the alternate?
Yep.
What days of the week?
It's the fourth
Thursdays.
Thursday afternoon.
Those should be okay.
Okay.
See, you nominated him for something, that's what I.
Yeah, that's
Second Thursday of the month.
paybacks.
It happens. It happens.
Second
Second
Thursday of the
Thursday
month,
of the
1
month.
to 3.
Oh, yeah, that's
Okay. Okay. So, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The vote was unanimous, the motion carries. Agenda item number 9, presentation and discussion of agency procurement and purchasing thresholds.
No, there wasn't a motion.
Oh, I'm sorry. What?
There wasn't a motion or a second on that.
Oh, I thought I said it.
There was a motion and second for who you wanted to be, but not the actual.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Brandy.
Motion carries.
Motion carried. It's teamwork, definitely. Okay. Again, presentation and discussion of agency procurement and purchasing thresholds.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Athena Forster, AVP of Regulatory Compliance. I'm also over procurement and grants. So Raymond had asked us to present to the board our current procurement thresholds and answer any questions that you gentlemen, ladies might have. So currently, we bring everything to the board at $75,000 for board approval. So if we have a new contract, a task order, an amendment, change order, anything, we bring that to you at $75,000 for approval. We do have a couple of contracts and things that were awarded previously that are a little different. And so we just kind of want to cover those. And then I'll be glad to answer any questions that you have. And as you can see in your memo, we did the research to see what the city of Denton, Louisville, Dart, and Trinity Metro, what their limits currently are. So they range anywhere from $50,000 to $250,000. So we're kind of somewhere in the middle. So any questions so far on that? So back in 2016, the board awarded our rail operations and maintenance contract. And in that contract, there is a line item in the contract for just miscellaneous capital items that we might need to do along the corridor or to the rail cars that, may come up as we're operating service. And that has a limit of $2 million per year. So what we do is if something is needed, First Transit, our operator, comes to staff with a request and a work authorization outlining the task and the dollar amount. We can negotiate that if we feel that the fees are too high. And once we all agree on what those fees should be, we sign off on the work authorization and we give them a notice to proceed with the work. We do not bring that one back to the board at the $75,000 limit, because when we initially awarded the contract, it was awarded as the lump sum $2 million in the line. There's about 12 or 15 lines on that contract that outline the cost of the miles, the cost of the train hour, or car miles, train hours, the capital, the right-of-way of the way along the rail line, various different things like that that might need to be taken care of during the term of the contract. So those work authorizations are negotiated. They are reviewed by multiple staff members at different threshold levels. Anything under $50,000, the VP signs off on. Anything above $50,000, it either goes to Christina or to Raymond for their approval and signature before we just jump out there and do, give them this authorization to go to work. So, and then the Moss contract. So currently we have not issued any task orders under the current Moss contract. We just have the parent contracts in place that are $0, no work authorizations or anything. So back in, I believe it was May, the board approved to give Raymond the authority to sign contracts up to a ceiling of 2.4 per annual basis. And so we would not bring something back to the board at over $75,000. He just has the authority to sign that. So what procurement and operations will be doing is basically starting a spreadsheet with that $2.4 million figure, and every time we issue a contract or a task order, it will decrement down, and if we get anywhere close to that 2.4, at that point we would have to come back to the board for additional authority. So staff's just tracking, we'll be tracking all of that. Michelle's team, procurement, will also be tracking as well.
And awarded those task orders would be part of the monthly report that Marissa
Correct.
gives as
Correct.
part of the financials.
So the board would know every month.
Right.
Yeah, so part of that MOS is we would say we've issued a task order to X vendor in the amount of X for what services, what city, or where the service will be performed, type of service.
So we're not asking for a vote here. This was for transparency because we have a new board. I wanted to bring this back. Frankly, $25,000 worth of signature authority one way or the other doesn't matter to me. I mean, it's not that much risk. But I wanted to highlight the fact that with the construction contracts and with the rail operations agreement, what the board typically does is they award the contract. Once the contract's awarded, that's the authority to execute the contract. Now, it wasn't set up where there was an annual, what happens is the board, we bring to the board the operating expenses associated with the contract and the capital projects associated with the contracts. So you approve that. You've already approved the contract itself, but it's a very large contract. So there is the ability for me to issue task orders within that contract up to $2 million, and that would be for a crossing replacement, or if there's scouring along the right-of-way that needs to be fixed, we would get a cost estimate. The contractor is basically a turnkey contractor. They're responsible for doing the work. We would go out and do a independent cost estimate to make sure that we're not paying too much, and then I have the authority to go ahead and sign a task order, just like you mentioned. But I wanted you to be aware of that, and if there's any desire or heart.
We've approved the master contract.
You approved the master contract.
And to be clear, you'll approve the annual budget. So for instance, next year, the line items that Michelle mentioned, the OEM replacement of 1.1 million and those items, when we go to actually execute the contract for that or the task order, that's something that has already been approved as part of the budget process. If there was anything additional, even if it was within the $2 million, but we didn't have budgeted funds for it, we would then come back to the board with either a budget amendment or a question of if we should
Amend the
order
contract
our
value.
financial aid
And I get that for these, where I get wrapped around the axle, and I'm gonna need your help with, is we have these MOS contracts that allow up to 2.4 million.
Right.
But those, since they're service, they're not like this. I've signed an agreement, but you could theoretically just say, I'm providing $2.4 million worth of Uber to the city of
Correct.
Frisco.
Right.
That I
And
have a little.
if we want to change that, we can change the signature authority. That's why we
That,
brought
that I
this
have a
up.
little, because it's different from, I mean, if I'm doing something for corporate drive, right, I've got a $5 million project with corporate drive, we approve that unless there's some scope change or something like that, I don't see it, staff runs. But that's just my,
Would you prefer that it's at the 75,000 threshold level that we bring
that
back to
number I
the
don't
board?
have an issue with. I think that's a fine number for what
So
we're
why don't we
budgeting.
do this? Why don't we bring it back? I don't expect for us to have any changes on the MOS contract. Maybe we can change the language around that for the MOS contract, anything over $75,000 will come to the board. I'm fine with that. That way it's just consistent.
Then it's consistent.
That was the reason I wanted to bring it, because there's policy differences. I just want
Yeah.
to make sure that this board feels comfortable with those thresholds.
Yeah.
So would the plan be to bring that at the September board
Yes.
meeting for action?
Yeah.
Is
We'd
that
amend the signature authority.
cumulative though? I mean, could you keep awarding 75, and then when that burns off another, for the same, and it's really $1 million, but you're doing the 75,000 at a time? Or is it, I guess I'm trying to, I know you're not trying to beat the system, but I'm trying to understand the process.
Yes.
So how does that work?
So if we have multiple contracts that we want to issue throughout the year, if it's over $75,000, we'd bring it to the board. If it's under the $75,000, we'd execute the contract.
Still
So-
subject to the 2.4.
Still subject to 2.4. We can't exceed the 2.4 annually.
So yes, it could.
Okay. I just want to know what I'm voting on, and then once we give you the authority, I don't care. But I guess I'd be careful if you're obligating us to 2.4 that we never saw, and it fell into that 75 at a time or whatever we've approved. Does that make sense? I don't think you would do it, but I just want to make sure.
And that would end up being tracked in that monthly MOS report that you'll be seeing every month. So you'll have a track sheet
Right.
every
The
month.
table that they're talking about,
Yep.
that hasn't started yet, because we don't have any task orders
Sure.
issued, will show the cumulative commitment that we've made towards that 2.4.
I guess what I'm saying though is I'll see that after the fact, and
Correct.
as opposed to, I knew what I gave him authority to do beforehand. And I know he needs authority, I'm just not sure I'm totally understanding how much authority I'm giving him for what. So maybe go over that one more time, because it seems like there's one authority for 75,000, there's another for 2.4, and that's what I'm missing.
Yeah, because the thought at the time was, much like the rail contract,
Okay.
right, where things happen, we want to implement service quickly, we're working with consultants, we say, okay, this service we want to start, and we're in between board meetings. To me, it's not that big an issue. We want to change it. That's why I'm bringing it back to the board.
Okay. No,
If we
understand.
want to change it back, which I'm actually suggesting that we do on the MOS contracts, is that we just make it consistent with everything else that we're doing. And then we don't have to have this discussion about, is it before or after the execution of the agreement.
I think what, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's what I'm hearing you say is that, and I'm just gonna do the math, we'll keep it
Yes.
simple.
Okay.
So, we've got a $2.4 million aggregate amount that originally you could assign us
Not
that.
to exceed, yes.
Whereas if a contract was $40,000, you could sign it because it's under $75,000. If you had 60 of those contracts for $40,000, you could sign each one of those 60 individually for $40,000, and that takes us up to the 2.4. So I think what I'm hearing you say is that 75,000, yes, that's per contract, but do we have an accumulation number where, okay, if it gets past this, it doesn't matter really how much it is, the board needs to be aware, or you give us a report in advance of executing these particular kind of these contracts instead of after the fact.
Yeah, I mean, I don't anticipate you doing this, but I don't want to
I
find
wouldn't
out at the next
anticipate
board
being here much longer.
Well, no,
We
no,
would
no.
ask for a Announced
I know, but that doesn't
resignation
help.
really
At
quick.
that point, it's too late. So if I come up next meeting and all of a sudden on that, you know, but before the budget's approved, there's 2.4 in extra spending, I'm gonna go, what? When did we approve that? And since I'm new, I never know if it was done in May or June and before I started, so that, I just,
Well, the good news is that we haven't executed anything.
okay, good.
And don't plan to for the next couple of months, so we can fix it.
Yeah, but once we've given you authority, I don't care how you spend it, when you spend, as long as it's staying in budget and you're spending it the way it's supposed to be
Right.
spent. Does that make sense?
And authority has been given, but I wondered, that's
Okay.
why we're bringing it back, because I felt like there was some discomfort about this particular one, and I wanted to make sure that, well, and to give this board the ability, because there are different spending thresholds between the cities, what DART has, what Trade Metro has, I just wanted to make sure that there was full transparency. You know, does the 75 make sense? You're fine with that, that's fine. I mean, my hope is that there's a level of trust in this position to be able to execute agreements, and that I'm always going to ensure that I'm not going to be overstepping the authority limits that would cause you to be speaking to somebody else in this seat at some point in the future.
The only thing, and I appreciate that, and I don't disagree with that, the only thing I would be interested in seeing is if it's the same vendor. In other words, if we executed a contract, let's say for $50,000 with vendor X, and vendor X comes in again, then per vendor, I wouldn't mind seeing an accumulation, but if you've got, because it's.
Yes,
it's-
and that could very well
yeah.
happen, because we could issue a contract in Louisville, and then
Right.
6 months
Yes.
later, oh, we want them to do some work up in Denton as well, and we would execute another contract.
So
That's
it may
a
be
great
that
point.
that threshold applies to the individual contract, but also an aggregate of
Not to
specific
exceed.
vendor. If it goes over 75,000 for
Okay.
specific vendor aggregately, that those will come back.
Okay.
I think we'll give you authorization, we just kinda wanna know where the money's going.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for that.
Sure.
Did you get that, Athena? You have any follow-up questions on that?
I believe so.
You made the mistake of saying, are there any questions?
All right, thank you.
I can tell you one thing we do in procurement is we monitor to make sure that if they say, you know, it's $74,000, well, okay, is that for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? And then we do the aggregate amount. So it could just be for $70,000, but it's 2 years. So now that's
And I also-
140.
And I also don't wanna be voting on the same contract as it took 3 years to complete, I gotta vote on it every year either. I'm gonna give you authority and it's be done, so, okay.
Okay. We'll
Okay.
bring it back in September.
Any other questions?
Yes, we'll bring it back in September. Thank you.
Thank you, Athena. Okay, that takes us to agenda item number 10, presentation and discussion of cost allocation model and efficiency study.
And I will need, you want to?
Everything I just said wasn't recorded, so I'm gonna have to say it all again. I know, I'm kidding.
Don't even think about
I'm
it.
teasing.
You can-
Don't
you
even
can have
think
mine too.
about
I
it.
will put it on extra loud.
I'm sure my counsel's saying the same thing sometimes.
Yes, so, sorry? Okay, we're on item number 10, presentation discussion of cost allocation model and efficiency study. At your seat, you have a green sheet. This is for information purposes, specifically for the new board members, but I want to make sure that everybody had it. It's the DCTA board member cities, November 1st, 2018. This was during a significant change in direction when we were thinking about reconstituting the board and going through the legislative agenda. The cities had drafted this letter and sent it to DCTA. And this is really the intent that they wanted to see. So number one was the 86th legislative session. We've been through that. The language was changed. We have a new board. I just really wanted to focus on item number 2 today, which was the requests that were made. I'm not going to run through all these. You have them. You can read through it. But this was a request by the cities to make sure that we were, and this is something that's been under discussion for a couple of years, about making sure that we have a definitive way of tracking costs by city, by service type. But there was also discussion, which is not written here, about the desire of the cities to have DCTA conduct an efficiency study. I had the opportunity to
meet with the 3 city managers yesterday. We had a very productive meeting. It brought to light some of the, and what I want to make sure that we're doing from a staff perspective, we've all talked about what's important for this agency, what's important for staff, and we recognize that stakeholder value is probably our top priority, but also meeting the mission, which is associated with mobility, air quality, economic development, and livability in the communities. But as a fundamental premise is stakeholder value. We wanted to make sure that we were taking a collective approach to what we're doing. And so we embarked on creating a cost allocation model. I think that's still valid. We want to continue to move forward with that. The Mobility as a Service contract was a way for us to create tools that would allow us to then provide new and innovative services to our member cities. And as the region grows and there's interest in more contracted services, like we use Lyft in some cases for contracted members, that we had a variety of service providers that we could use. The next intent was to finish the cost study and then bring in, which we will talk about later, a consultant to help start the transition from our fixed route services to some of these mobility as a services. As you heard earlier today, we've been looking at some of the routes, and there's no question there's an opportunity for more efficiency on the routes. There's certain times of day where peak service and bus service makes sense, maybe off-peak doesn't. And so how do we walk from where we are today to a future state? So Brandy, do you mind? I created a few slides. The staff hasn't even seen this because, again, the meeting just happened yesterday. But I really do believe in creating some themes that help staff with clarity as to what our vision and where we're heading. And we labeled the 2019 a year of change. And these are all the things that we have been changing. And it's been a tremendous amount of effort on staff, and I really do appreciate the staff's commitment, the board's commitment. But you typically would pick maybe 1 or 2 of those in a year and try to take those on. But we've addressed leadership changes, legislative changes, board members have changed. All of these different things have been changing. We stood up a local government corp that we will be talking about in the next, I believe, either September or October. In September, going through the details of that. I think that's already starting to pay off in metrics that we will share with you later during that meeting. But a lot of change, and this really kind of sets the groundwork for what I'm going to coin on the next slide, which is that's a year of change. We really need to start thinking about going into 2020 as a year of transformation. I had a lot of help. Actually, this was something that Todd Heilman went onto our board, and I took a picture of it, and I went, I'm going to pretty that up. But you know, Donna Barron, Todd, Claire, Mike Levitt, all sat down. I thought they provided great insight as to what they're looking for. And you notice there's not, the word efficiency study isn't on here because that sometimes has a negative connotation. But we really need to look at this as an assessment phase, an evaluation, and action plan. And if we do that, the current model, when you look at what we need to do is we need to bring in, and we were planning on doing this anyway with HDR, but it was more focused on the services that we have. And I really do believe, in talking with staff, is we are challenged to try to execute on a daily basis. And this isn't a whining process, because I certainly don't want to adopt what you cities have going on a weekly basis. I know you work incredibly hard as well. But we're getting to the point that it's just not scalable the way we do business today. So what we want to do, and I think we have complete agreement with the cities on this, is to kind of bring a team of experts in to look at these different mobility as a service concepts, do analysis of our current system, critique our existing, and we have a lot of this information already, so this part should go fast. But look at our routes, what's inefficient about them, look at best practices, what missing services, what gaps do we have in our cities, and then of the services that we provide, what are underutilized services, and that's just to provide kind of a baseline of where we are. Then the evaluation process would be that we look at what gaps do we want to fill, that there's interviews with the cities and the council members, and the public at large as to what kind of services really match up. And I do believe that that's important to have industry expertise around transit services, because there are certain ways that we have to do business. And then we look at what kind of changes need to be made and what kind of efficiencies come out of that look ahead. Ultimately, coming to a new model for service and metrics, and what are the best practices, what policies and procedures do we have, and then what does the new cost model look like. And so on the far left, we do business today. We have a budget that you're hopefully going to approve next month. But this would give us a comprehensive look and approach at making sure that we have full engagement by the cities, that we have a new budget, we understand what staffing needs are required. Because as we talk about implementing mobility as a service, it's not about issuing a task order. It's trying to understand, well, how effective is that going to be in the city? What services is it providing? Is it less costly? Is it more costly? And there's going to be a question to be asked, not only by the consultants but the cities, is what's the value proposition? It may actually increase costs in some areas, but you're getting a better service and a better value. And so I felt a lot better after talking to the member cities. We're going to probably take a multi-pronged approach. There's experts that look at the efficiency in how we do things, and are there more automated ways, and hopefully technology can help not only on the mobility services but how we actually execute work. We still do a few things that are very labor intensive, like having to count ridership with a tally sheet. We don't have a smart fare box. Well, there's passenger counters out there, and that costs money. So we want to try to take a comprehensive approach. We'll likely request an RFQ, and let's just go to the next slide. So not a lot of change here. The only thing in this slide that changed from the first is that we'd go out and do a request for qualifications, likely engage a transformation services program management group to look at the whole transformation process. We'd still want to hire HDR, which is a transit-related project management team, to focus on the specifics of, well, what technology works best? Should we have rideshare? Should we have on-demand? Should we have a zone? How does that particularly work? But have this transformation program leader work with HDR and with TTI so that we can make sure that the cost model, the transformation process, and that the services that we're recommending all tie together into a long-range strategy. So that's where, again, this was a briefing item. I'm not asking, or we're not asking for a board decision, but I wanted to give you an update on what the discussion is. Timeline, we're probably looking at 3 to 4 month process. Depends on how quickly we can get the contractors on board. In the budget, we would recommend, once we know what the costs are associated with this. My guess is you're going to be looking at somewhere about from $150,000 to $250,000 to create the study, but I think it really does set a path forward for the future of DCTA.
And the length of time is estimated?
About 3 to 4 months. But I would just say, give me a little latitude on that, because we need to meet with the contractors. So I would say 3 to 4 months to conduct the study. We still have to procure the services. That could take a couple of months to do that. So
But
my
you've
hope.
already spoken with some of the cities, have you said?
So yesterday I had a meeting, because this has been this letter has been around for a while, and
You mentioned some of the new board members may not know those
Yeah.
names.
pardon me.
The names you mentioned.
The city managers.
Right, they.
Oh, yeah,
that
the
was-
Yeah,
city
sorry.
managers of
The city managers.
Raymond, can I add?
Yes,
I'm Mike Levitt, city manager of Highland Village,
Okay.
and was there. And I just want to add, I wholeheartedly agree. Probably one takeaway message was, we all use benchmarks, we all use performance measures. We, look at everything. We want to become the leader in efficiency of benchmarking and performance measures.
I agree.
We see that this is something that, we always compare ourselves. We do, the cities. Transit compares, we see it all the time, the matrix, where we compare ourselves to others. We really see this as a way of becoming a leader in the industry and transit. Let's really look at it and become that forefront out there with it. That was our goal. That's truly our goal.
I knew he was smart
So that's the end of this presentation, unless there's questions with regard to item number 10.
When do you think you'll be able to get an RFQ out the door?
The City of Denton, City Manager Todd Heilman was gracious enough to give us an example of an RFQ, a specification. So we're going to start working on that. My hope would be in the next 60 days to get it out the door.
Exciting. Good.
Yeah, thank you. I think this will help us have a path forward where everybody feels comfortable moving
Well,
in the same direction.
I think to the broader scope, being able to speak to the region and to our residents clearly about the quality of work that we do, really, and what a gem we can be for the community. I think sometimes people look at government and they go, well, it's us versus them, and they don't realize we're all together in this. And so this gives us a much clearer way to communicate that, I think, in the long haul. Which we're going to have to do as we stay polarized in this country with politics.
And I know it's been, it seems like a long time coming, but I just want to hopefully have some recognition that there's been a lot of change, and this board didn't get seated until July when the new board members came on board. So I wanted to get that started as soon as we could, and we had some feedback from cities that this would probably be the biggest, most important thing that we could all work on together to create a path forward for the agency. I wholeheartedly agree, and so I'm looking forward to launching this process.
At what point will the board have input on the cost allocation model, or how that methodology is being developed?
So we've been working with TTI, Texas A&M Transportation Institution, and they've been working on the model. It's a challenge to try to figure out how to split out rail, because not all the rail is by city. There's some cities that aren't part of it. The connection down to Trinity Mills isn't in anybody's city, so we have to sit there and think, okay, well, who's done an allocation like this? And so they've come up with a couple. You look at the numbers and go, that doesn't make any sense. So I think we're really close. We've been saying that for quite a while now, right? But my hope is that within 30 days of everybody getting at least the initial look at it, that I would actually like to bring that through this board and have the board look at it. This requested that the cities would be looking at it, but we've had a reconstitution of the board. We have members that are not part of the 3 cities, so I'd rather bring that through the board, allocate the appropriate time to walk through this, and if you want to bring your city managers or your CFOs or set up a special meeting, that's certainly we can do that. But I'd like to use our board process to kind of walk us through that cost model, if that makes sense. So I'm thinking within the next 30 to 45 days, we'll have a cost model that everybody can start chewing on. Okay?
Yeah, and if I could just elaborate just real briefly on that, the cost allocation model originally was born out of when we looked at the UNT contract, and we've got, I don't know how many buses, we're moving many students. Were there some costs that we weren't recovering in that contract? So, and we don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer, and I think that was really the major thrust to say, because as we go, we've got our next agenda item is a third-party contract with another city. So how do we know exactly what our costs are when we're allocating these contracts? So I think that was the primary driver, and then whatever else comes out of it, I think is something that's beneficial.
Kind of like gut, like there's just so fraught. Like bus service is pretty easy, right? We got the buses, they operate in your city limits. That's your cost. Rail may be more complicated. And then kind of the thing that is kind of stuck in my mind is, well, if you do a lot of investment around your rail stop and you increase ridership and then you increase your cost, you have this kind of, we're going to punish you for increasing your usage. And so I would think there would need to be some look at, well, if the cities encourage development around their rail station and therefore they have usage, we don't need to punish them for that in the cost allocation. There has to be some way to ferret that out, right?
Yeah.
Like we don't want you to put in a $200 million development around the rail station, your usership goes up, and then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, and now we want you to ride. You know what I mean? Like, you can create these bad disincentives. Like, this is a big problem in the water service.
Well,
Right.
see, that wasn't, for me, none of that really was part of the discussion. For me, it was more, when I sat down at the first meeting and saw we had 30 or so third-party contracts with people outside of, and it's like, okay, that's fine, but how do we know what to charge them? And if we're under-recovering, then that means the monies that are coming in. So as far as rail and those kind, my concern was more of how do we cost allocate for the third-party contracts instead of.
And more
But
of a
there's some other things coming out of it. That was the thrust for me. So
and more of a snapshot than like a formula for the future.
Well, that,
or what is it?
no, actually, the prior board really wanted to make sure that we were allocating costs almost like at a P&L level, not only by city, but by type of service that they're getting. And the significant caution is you may not like what it has to say. Because it's going to show, and this is why transit systems, by their very nature, try not to do this. And it's a philosophical issue, but at the same time, if you're not careful and you ask for the answer, one of the cities, and I don't know because we haven't really identified or completed the study, right? But you could wind up with, what's that?
It'll be us.
Yeah. You might find one's underpaying, the other one's overpaying, and everybody starts getting in a feud over it,
That gets
right?
to our conversation of regionalism.
Yes.
And where we need to be, for example, Monsignor King and our daily bread.
right.
That's a county issue. And we, as the Denton County Transit Authority, get to solve that. And if I'm sitting here and wearing a Louisville hat, I'm going, well, that's a Denton problem, they need to fix that. That's not. That's a county issue.
Completely agree.
So, to my mind, yes. Do I come out of Louisville? Do I have that hat? Yes, but I am not here because of Louisville. I'm here because I want to make sure that this authority is serving Denton County.
Well, and just as appreciate that when a board, and not this board, the one prior to, same board, right, but just different members, when the direction said create a cost allocation model, and this came from the cities to create a cost allocation model, we're going to do everything it said to do. That's the directive that we've been given by the board. The issue is it creates a lot of extra work, and it resulted in us hiring a analyst because they're going to have to keep track of. It's not just setting it up once. It's keeping track of it monthly and reporting on it monthly and making sure that we have P&Ls by city, by service, and I think any city would say, well, that sounds good. Yeah, I'd like to have that. But then I think it creates a fray when you start thinking about, well, why? And Highland Village is a perfect example. They don't even have a train station.
If we're regional, why are we doing this? It would
Yeah.
be my thing. If that's the case, I mean, where we
Yeah.
don't even have the station in our city. But because one for all and all for one, I agree that there should be some accountability in certain areas. I just don't want it to become an area where it divides us. Because it's never been done before, and I'm thinking there's a reason.
To my angle, if I've got tons of Collin County going, writing checks because their half cent is going to ED, how much of that am I willing to support for that linkage? Because we talk a lot about it, the linkage on the north side between the two counties. Well, this at least gives me a way to talk to them about equity on that side, because otherwise I get this negative feedback loop, right? I'm paying more and more for transportation to support them, which is subsidizing them, which makes them look better, which gives them more money that they can send to ED checks, and I start losing more businesses. And so.
And this will give us a lens as to what costs are actually going there. Are we charging enough?
Yeah.
Right? And then it'll allow the board members to have some discussion about it. And whether you choose to use it for that purpose and say, okay, we're not going to do this part anymore between the cities because it's adding a lot of cost, a lot of effort, and it may not necessarily give us, there has to be the regional part of the discussion.
It has to be, absolutely.
Sam, what time's your meeting?
The work session starts at 5:45. I'll be okay.
Okay.
Let me just, can I just say this last thing?
Please.
Just to temper expectations. you know, we have cost sharing on our fire contract. And just because you have data that says what these are what the costs are and this is how they're allocated does not mean anyone will believe it. Okay. You know what I mean? Like, so it's a great thing to do, but you have to go into it kind of like with the right heart or it won't work. Because it can just be a data set to beat each other up with too. You know, and I think at this point it's a necessary exercise because people not only have to be treated fairly, ideally they have to believe they're being treated fairly.
Right.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And that's my hope that will come out of it that way.
I think it will.
Okay.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank
for
you.
staying. He's got to go to his
Is that all?
council meeting.
Yeah.
Were we done on this particular
Yes,
item?
we are.
Okay, Joe?
You have one. He has one at 7 as well.
Oh, a meeting? Oh.
Well, it's only 5:30.
Okay.
We're in the home stretch.
Okay.
I gotta be in Wilmer at 7.
Oh.
Is that?
Heavenly
All right, let's get going. Let's
Does
get
that
going.
mean we have
Yeah,
2 more
right.
innings? Is that like the 7th inning stretch?
So, agenda item number 11, consider interlocal agreement with Capel for the provision of here we go, contracted services. Lindsay.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi again. I just accidentally called my mom while I was walking up here. All right. Sorry about that.
Call me, Mom. Get me out of here.
Brandy is handing out right now a revised copy of the ILA that was provided in your packet. Unfortunately, we had provided an incorrect document, and so all of this is correct and what we're going to go over with you, including the amounts that I talked about earlier. So just briefly, I guess on the screen here, what I have is just kind of a quick outline of the implementation schedule for the Capel service. Capel had approached us about a year ago to help identify solutions to their workforce transportation needs, particularly in the West Side Business Park area, which is very similar to the Alliance area where we're providing lift service, in that it has distribution warehouses, relies heavily on low-wage and shift workers, and does not have nearly enough affordable housing for nearby affordable housing for the workers in the area. You know, as mentioned earlier, we last briefed this board, or some version of this board, on this item on June 12th and received direction to proceed on the project. And so after providing updates and multiple meetings with the board and committees and Capel staff, we finalized an interlocal agreement for your consideration today. This ILA allows DCTA to provide lift service through our existing contract, so it's not part of the MOS contract that we were talking about earlier, but it's rather the existing contract that we're using for other services right now with Lyft. The ILA also allows for greater flexibility, so if Capel becomes interested in other mobility solutions, so if they decide Lyft just isn't the right solution, or they want to add to, the ILA is written in such a way that it will allow us to not just go with Lyft, but mobility providers in general. So we can leverage the MOS contracts if we need to. The ILA provides that of a $100,000 total budget set by Capel, $10,000 of that is set aside and earmarked specifically for marketing and outreach efforts, which they will be leading with our support. $67,500 would be allocated for direct invoiced costs. So the mobility services that would be provided to Capel, we would then directly invoice them for those. And then an administrative fee of 25% of those invoice costs. Absent the cost allocation study, we felt that 25% would be a fair and reasonable amount for this particular contract. So we anticipate service to be deployed October 1st. And, one final item, August 27th is when the Capel City Council will review this interlocal agreement for approval. And with that, happy to answer any questions.
I'm confused because under that item 2.1, under the Article 2, I can read that both ways. Is that a 2-year contract possibility, or is it a perpetual contract? First time I read it, it sounded perpetual. This one sounds shorter.
Yes, we're calling the first year is a pilot program, which hasn't been for termination. and then it automatically renews for an additional period of 1 year unless terminated by either party.
So the max is 2 years on this, okay.
Correct.
Yes.
Do we want to only do a 30-day on the non-renewal, or do you want to give a little more time to be able to negotiate something? I mean, at 30 days, you're not even going to get to a board approval to
We do
even
60.
negotiate it.
60?
Yeah.
I'd be good with 60 or 90.
Okay.
Question I have is on, and I agree with the 2.1, I had a concern there, but that clears it up. On page 3, at the top of the page, paragraph C, it says the parties shall work together to analyze and review ongoing services and alternative methods to meet the long-term public transit needs of Capel. That's just sort of a general statement in there, but it really doesn't seem to be consistent with the agreement since it's only a 2-year agreement. And number 2, are the people who are involved in this analyzing and working together part of the administration fee, which that's not really listed as one of the components of the admin fee. So I would just prefer that just be removed. I mean, it could maybe cause more confusion than it's worth.
Agreed.
And I do, on the $10,000, I'm a little confused because it states specifically that the city of Capel is responsible for the marketing and outreach, not to exceed $10,000. Who writes the checks for the marketing and outreach?
So it would be Capel. We did something similar with the Zip Zone with Alliance, and so we wanted to make sure that everything was clearly articulated in terms of whose responsibility was what, how many dollars are being allocated to those responsibilities, just so that, because the marketing and communication is such a critical component to the success of the program, that if that is not executed and not properly funded, then the program won't be successful.
And we have had some issues in the past where we've done partnerships like this, and it was not clearly outlined in the agreement, and they came to us saying, well, we would like some marketing and communication support. Well, you haven't paid for that. So we're just, I understand it does make it a little confusing. The $10,000 really is a moot point to this board.
Our revenue source will be $90,000.
Correct.
Right.
Okay. Is there a requirement? Because what I'm hearing you say is that if they don't do that, if they don't uphold their end of the 10% bargain of this contract, then that sort of puts the whole program in jeopardy. Is there something in the contract other than this exhibit? It says that they'll be responsible for it, but is there something that allows staff, DCTA staff, to review it or to see if it's being done? I mean, or is it just you guys go do it and we don't really know anything about what you're doing? Does that make sense?
We did not provide those details in the ILA, no.
Okay.
I think ultimately they're responsible for the success of the program.
Right.
We do our role, they do their role, and together it should be successful.
So you're saying the primary reason for this to be in here is to clearly show that DCTA is not taking responsibility for any marketing and or outreach costs.
Correct.
That is correct.
Does the contract say that other than this exhibit?
Yeah, in E.
Okay. Because I read through it and I didn't.
3.1E, during the terms of Capel shall be responsible for all primary
Gotcha.
marketing and outreach efforts.
Right, financially responsible, that's implied in that, okay, all right, okay, good.
And I've got allocated direct invoice costs, so that means we don't invoice them, we don't get to the, okay, and it's next to the, okay.
Can y'all put y'all's alarm on so it'll ring every time you're supposed to do that?
I assure you, finance will not let us off the hook on that, so.
We'll have to change our legal representation
Yes.
on this contract.
Yeah, we started negotiating this.
Oh,
weeks ago.
yep, we did. This was all finalized. Can update that.
So are you gonna, sorry,
You need a motion?
your
Yes,
motion as
because it
amended?
was an action.
And then just to reiterate, we talked about this during the budget portion. If this item is approved, we will add the associated expense and reimbursement revenue to the FY20 budget that we will present then in September for approval.
Any other questions? Okay, I'll entertain a motion for agenda item number 11.
So move approval for the section 3.1, C's being stricken and, what was it, 60 days?
That was a
2.1.
2.1 for 30 to 60 days.
Okay, second?
And the change to the attorney.
Right.
Yes.
We'll change that.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The vote is unanimous, the motion carries.
Thank
Okay,
you.
and we're moving like molasses.
Well,
Okay, agenda item number 12, consider task order 6 to HDR Engineering, Inc. Michelle, are you doing that?
Yes,
Thank
that is
you.
me. So as we mentioned as part of the budget discussion, we have approximately $60,000 in unspent federal transit administration funds to be used for planning. We'd like to use those funds as well as existing fiscal year 2019 and proposed fiscal year 2020 funds to engage HDR to assist staff with the integration of mobility as a service into DCTA service area. I did just want to kind of respond. While the name of the firm is HDR Engineering, they are a multifaceted firm. They provide architecture service, finance, asset management, and one of those being planning and consulting specific to public transportation. And so they are one of the two planning entities that we have under contract. They are not the ones that did the comprehensive operational analysis. But we are recommending that the board award or allow Raymond to execute a task order with HDR in an amount not to exceed $150,000 to provide planning assistance for integration of mobility as a service into the DCTA services. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
You said up to 150, we're allocating 3 allocating 60 of that.
So 60 of it is in an existing capital project that will be, if the budget is approved, will be carried over. We have additional operating funds in the FY20 budget to cover the rest, but we also have FY19 operating funds to cover whatever work we can get done between now and the end of September.
But the total is not to exceed 150.
It's still 150, it's just how we're paying for that 150.
Yes, cobbled funds.
So help me understand the interplay between this consulting or study and then the, we're not calling it efficiency and cost. What are we calling the new study? Are we calling it something different now? The ones that you presented? Was it?
Item 10.
Yeah.
What's that?
Transformation.
Transformation, yes, yes.
The transformation
Yeah,
study?
so
Wordsmith.
are the, it seems like those would sort of be
Yes, they will.
sort of done either simultaneously, there's going to be a lot of interplay between them,
Yeah,
so.
yes, what we talked about with the city managers is that we'll get this executed, but we're not going to start it until
Oh,
we
okay.
hire the other one.
Yeah.
So we'll have it all figured
Oh.
out, we'll get the players together, get them in a room and say, okay, you're doing the
Okay.
transformation project oversight, you're available to do mobility services and the cost allocation. So
Okay.
we'll bring them all
Okay.
underneath that.
Wonderful, all right.
Okay,
You guys need a motion on this?
we do.
Move approval of agenda item 12. Is there a resolution or anything to requesting the task order 6 to HDR Engineering for service change planning assistance?
Second? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The vote is unanimous, the motion carries. Agenda item number 13, discussion of regional transportation and legislative issues. Christina?
I just have one item. We currently use Drew Campbell for our state legislative affairs activities in Austin, and his contract has come up. So we currently have an RFP out in the streets for state legislative affairs consulting services. All of those proposals are due back on September 11th, and we anticipate bringing that back to the board in November for award.
Real quick question, and if I'm out of posting, let me know.
Not in November, but there's no meeting.
In the budget discussion where we had a certain amount of money for federal legislative lobbying or consulting, is that, do we only have one and that's with Capital Edge we've got, or do we have two?
We have one for federal.
Okay, which is is that Capital Edge?
Yes.
Okay, and was that the one that was 90,000? I think that was 90,000, do we pay them
That
90?
sounds right.
Okay, all right, that's it, that's all I
One
need.
for federal, one for state, right?
Visiting the budget issue.
Yes, yes, okay, thank you.
Was there anything else with that, Christina, that
That's
item?
the only item for that.
Okay. Future agenda items and board member request.
I'll mention that tomorrow is the last day to sign up for the APTA annual before the fees go up at the end of this week.
And remind me when that is? It's in September.
I was
It's in
planning to cover
September.
that in the
Okay,
community interest.
very good, thank you. Okay,
We don't have an item.
thank you so much. Yeah.
But just to review a couple of the things from today's discussion for the agenda items, on September 26th, we will have a new start time, and we will have a work session with Frank to go over the bylaws in great detail and historical context. We can go ahead and put potential approval of bylaw modifications. I don't know that we will be ready, but we'll also have the bylaw modifications for approval on the October board
At least if we have the actionable and we're there, then we
Right.
can, but.
Right.
Yeah.
We also have the Moss signature authority from earlier discussion on the September board meeting, as well as, I think that's about it. And then for October, bringing back the board governance document, which we can amend according to the bylaws discussion.
I've got a couple of others that maybe we can talk about. On the bylaws timeline, on the written comments, if we could make sure we can have written comments submitted after that conversation, because that conversation might elicit some new written comments. And then I'd like to see about the restructure or the change out of the NTMC board, and maybe delay their budget approval meeting until after that, but I don't know how the time frame works on that.
We have to have an NTMC budget approved before the start of the fiscal year.
We're
So
planning on
we had
bringing
planned
NTMC.
to have it like we did today, right before the DCTA board meeting.
Well, if we could have that conversation and figure out, that's what I'd like to, if we can.
Let's slate for September for the next board meeting,
Yeah.
but we have to approve the budget 30 minutes prior to this meeting.
Okay.
Part of the budget amendments.
Yeah, it's all
Yeah.
budget amendments.
It's a living, yeah.
And I did also want to mention that.
You see where I was going with that though, right?
Mhm.
So the new board approves the new budget, so, yeah, so it rolls up to this.
And I did also want to mention that Raymond has asked us to schedule certain speakers to come in and share information. So it's interesting that Jim mentioned Christoph Spiegler because Raymond saw Christoph Spiegler speak at a APTA CEO conference and thought he was amazing. So we have
already
been
planned on bringing him in.
we have been in contact with him, and as of right now, it looks like we're planning to have him come in December to speak.
We tried to get him in earlier, he wasn't available.
Right. We also have Russell Laughlin on the docket for December. Do you want to talk about?
December or September? September
September.
6th.
Oh, okay, well, actually, I think works out maybe better.
Okay.
That's better.
Yeah. And then we are attempting to get Michael Morris to come in December as well, which will pair very well with Christoph.
Okay. Wow, anything else? So one of the things that I had asked staff to do, when we had our board governance, it's important if we can to have representatives of the board attend different things. So we now have like a list that we can fill out and possibly send to Brandy so that she can know if she needs to reserve, get tickets, that kind of thing. So
Okay,
we
great.
can.
Our thought process was if you could fill this out before you leave today, although we realized we ran long, but kind of moving for next meetings, put your name on the top and just check the items that you're interested in, and she can get you registered and send you calendar invites so you can add it to your calendar. But the APTA conference that you mentioned is also on this.
I'd like to see you guys go too. I mean, I think it'd be a real benefit. I'd love to see our staff.
Oh, yeah.
As well as board members.
Yes.
It's tight.
I thought it was in September, it's October.
I thought you were sponsoring a table at the thing. You were gonna do that.
And then just a reminder, October 29th at
Maybe.
1:30 is going to be the naming ceremony after Charles Emery for the Old Town Station. So the new number is 1:30. We've always had the date. We sent out the save the date on the 1:30, and we will be sending something. We have a very complex invitation list, so we did realize that you guys are supporting it, but just please know that we will be sending a more formal email invite to pretty much everybody who's ever had contact with over the past 15 years.
Oh, my God, where are we holding it? At Jerry's?
Old Town Station.
Yeah. Okay. So Just one more item of interest. Raymond is getting married between now and our next meeting.
Yes.
So,
Does that require board
Thank you,
approval?
thank you.
Yes, it requires board approval.
Yes.
You still got time,
Sorry,
man.
sorry they tabled it for another
Now I
month.
know why you wanted more authorization, right?
I have no idea how he's made it up till now, but anyway, God bless you, and I
Thank
just
you.
pray everything goes well, and
Thank
Kelly's
you
an
very much.
amazing woman, so just, wow. Okay, so I would entertain a motion to adjourn, and we're also adjourning the NTMC meeting as well.
Second.
So, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries, and it's 5:51.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.